Gosh, Paul, that was amazing. I mean, there's a reason why in my new book, Living in Wonder, I call you one of the prophets of our time, trying to help us see the world in a new and urgent way. One of the things that struck me about your talk was how open you are about the spiritual element of the machine and the attack of the machine on humanity. In my new book, I talk about how one of the most shocking things that I found out in doing this research about enchantment was a confirmation of something you intuited even before you became a Christian, that there are many people involved both in the occult and in Silicon Valley at a very high level who do in fact believe that there are higher intelligences expressing themselves specifically through the machines. One person even told me that AI is like a high-tech Ouija board, and that some of these creative elites in Silicon Valley hold sessions to call down the aliens as they think they are. They think they're space aliens, or rather the aliens are creatures, transdimensional higher intelligences who are giving us information and knowledge to better ourselves and build a better machine. Some of the occultists believe specifically that the old gods, people that Christians would call, or entities Christians would call demons, are trying to merge humanity with the machine as a precursor to enslave humanity. They're quite open about this. And I thought Paul Kingsnorth got there first. You seem to clearly believe this is demonic. If so, can you talk a little bit more explicitly about that? And what I'm really interested in is what sort of Christianity do we have to have, aside from the asceticism, to properly understand and confront and resist the machine as a spiritual force?
Well, I'm not a theologian and I'm not a priest. I'm just a writer. And if I intuited anything, as I said in the talk, it was through reading so many other writers who'd intuited it as well, because you can feel, and people have been able to feel since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, that something very strange and alien has entered the world. I'm not qualified to say what it is in spiritual terms. I just have hunches. That's what I'm really talking about. I'm not going to stand here and say, demons are coming at you through your smartphone. I don't know. I mean, they might be. It wouldn't at all surprise me. I think there is a force that underpins all of this that is a real metaphysical thing, that is not human-created. And as you say, the people in Silicon Valley think that as well, and that's the interesting thing. When I started looking into AI and I looked into the project more broadly, two things are really striking, especially about artificial intelligence. One is that the people who are creating it don't really know how it works or where it's going. And they all say this. They don't really know even why these things are doing what they're doing. They're already starting to do things that they haven't been programmed to do. I mean, they're supposed to learn, but they're learning things they never thought they could learn. They're developing personalities they never thought they would have. So firstly, they don't really know how they work or quite where they're going to go. And secondly, they're all scared of them. It's really strange. They're all scared of them. There was a piece in the New York Times a while back, actually, which I quoted in one of my essays, and I can't remember the name of the journalist, but he went off and he interviewed a lot of these AI developers. And all of them said, yeah, we're really scared about this, and actually there probably ought to be a moratorium and we should stop doing it, but we can't because otherwise the Chinese will beat us. So we're just going to keep going. And he said to them all, he asked them all the same question. He said, given that you're all frightened of the thing you're creating, why are you creating it? And he said they couldn't exactly answer the question, but they had a feeling that they were, in his words, that they had a responsibility to usher this new force into the world. And I thought that was really interesting. They were ushering something, summoning something. That's what ushering means.
Summoning.
So they feel like they're summoning something, right? And they don't really know what's going on or quite how it works. But they know it's there, and they don't give their kids phones, and they all talk about building God. And as I said in the talk, it's the same, it's the old story. So exactly what is happening, I do not know. But there's obviously a spiritual dimension to it. And it seems to me as Christians, that we ought to be able to see what that dimension is. At the very least, even if we want to be purely materialistic about it, then as humans, we are using our technologies to pursue the direction that Christians are warned not to pursue, which is the direction where we walk away from God and into ourselves, and we try to serve ourselves with no reference to God. So at the very least, we are pursuing power and knowledge and greed. But on the other side of the equation, metaphysically, it seems likely to me that if there's a demonic realm out there, if there is an adversary and he wants to take us away from God, then this would be a very effective way of doing it.
So would you agree with me then that the kind of Christianity that is capable of resisting this or combating it at its own level is one of whatever tradition, Orthodox, Catholic, or Protestant, that takes spiritual warfare as a real thing and an important part of being Christian? Or have you thought about it at that level?
Yeah, it's interesting this. So I'm a fairly new Christian and I'm also English. So those two things going together mean that I'm almost embarrassed to talk about almost anything. So I don't really know what I'm doing here, to be honest. But I think if you're going to go in, you should just go full in and just start talking about demons on the stage. But
you're in the South, brother. It's fine.
I know, that's what I thought. I thought it's fine. I've been reading about snake handling churches. I was looking forward to coming here, actually. And I hope I'm going to get to see some snake handling before I go.
Have you seen the snake handling Orthodox?
I'm looking forward to it. I thought you were going to be doing that, actually, Rod. Well, it's never too late. Yeah, I don't want any snakes right now because I'm not ready yet. But I've lost my train of thought. No, so what I was trying to say was
spiritual warfare.
Spiritual warfare. So it's interesting that I wasn't a Christian for most of my life. Didn't have much time for organized religion. And the religion I grew up with, which is a kind of Anglicanism in England, England is a very religious country, not even really anti-religious, just not religious. And so the Christianity that's existed there probably since the Reformation is a kind of compromise thing where you don't really talk much about these actual spiritual matters. Nobody really mentions the devil or hell or demons or any of this stuff that's actually absolutely central to the Christian worldview. They don't really talk about it. They just talk about good works in the world and politics and being good and having a moral law and things. So there's no sense that there's a spiritual war going on. And it wasn't until I really became a Christian 5 years or so ago, started really reading the Bible and reading around it, that I understood that the whole story that we're faced with is a story of a spiritual war that's been going on since the fall, right? Since the beginning of time. A creator God and then the force that rebels against him. And that's all happening now. And the coming of Christ is part of that story too. So you can't ignore it. If you take it out of the picture, there is no picture. So if that's true, that means that spiritual war is still going on. And it's going on through the things that we make. Because when we try to create things, that's what we're doing. We're assuming the role of creators. And so of course it's going on in the machines. Of course it's going to come through the screens. If everyone is sitting there addicted to something all day long, and that thing that they are addicted to is making them isolated and angry, materialistic, divided, and in no position whatsoever. Think about the mood you're in after you've been doom scrolling on the internet, and whether that's the same mood you're in when you pray or go to a church. It's the opposite mood. It's the mood that takes you away from that. But what does the devil do? The devil shatters everything and divides everything, divides us away from God. What does technology do? It divides our consciousness. It divides our concentration. It breaks us apart. So it's a perfect instrument. So if there's a spiritual war going on, it has to be there. And as I said, even if you just want to look at it in a purely materialistic way, the arguments for not getting involved in this stuff are very clear, but I think it's deeper than that as well.
Well, I'm going to turn this over to Jason Baxter, our friend here, and I just wanted to point out one of the things I learned in my research is that the key, or a very key aspect to re-enchantment, by which I mean being able to have a direct perception of the presence of God, the Holy Spirit, is the ability to focus attention. So and this is something that psychologists, neuroscientists have shown that you must be able to focus your attention in order to perceive things that people call transcendent. The internet, in that regard, is a vast disenchantment machine because it fragments our attention, makes it impossible, or very difficult at least, to sustain attention. All of us who work on the internet have lived with this. We know this. I do. I can't read a long novel like I used to be able to. But so in that regard, there is neuroscientific proof of the sort of things you've been talking about. Jason.
Yeah, so many things. One of the things that I think, if the internet is a vast machine for disenchantment, it makes me think that against all expectations and against my MBA parents' prophecy, what I do, teaching the great books, turns out to be marketable again. There was an article just there was an article just a week or two ago in the Atlantic, the elite college students who don't read books, and it's mainly sort of concerned with their inability to sustain this long attention. So I mean, even though I appreciate my friend's critique, at least as a sort of teacher of the great books, that actually seems to me more of an opportunity and an exciting opportunity, that because I do see my students come with a type of spiritual hunger, and if you can wake that up, then I think they appreciate what we could call an old technology, like the Iliad or the Odyssey. Maybe preferably technologies at least 700 years old, right? But I had one comment, one story, and then one question. The comment is, it is interesting that Christopher Nolan in Oppenheimer also said that he was specifically interested in our age of the question of technological determinism, the one that of course played out in the 40s with the creation of atomic weapons. But he thought it was relevant for our own day in terms of the creation of artificial intelligence. And so to hear Paul saying things about our designers saying, we don't feel that we have any choice in this matter, we have to get to the technology before another country does, is really the exact same thing, just playing out 70 years later. I think Christopher Nolan was very interested in that. My story goes, and I have a friend who's written a book on Steve Jobs and the spirituality of the iPhone. And the metaphor that he develops over the course of his book is that the iPhone is a digital cathedral. And I think that just sort of supports Paul's intuitions, his hunches, right? That is, it's a device which is meant to replace a traditional object of worship. And the story my friend tells me, kind of a wild story, told to him by a biochemist who was once backstage with Steve Jobs at a conference, and they were in a green room together. And when he heard that this biochemist was a specialist in the brain, the neural effects of LSD on the brain, allegedly, my friend tells me, Steve Jobs confessed to him this anecdote. Once upon a time, I was on an LSD trip, and Satan himself appeared to me. And he says, I'll give you the gift of charisma if you will indeed give me your soul. And allegedly, Jobs agreed to the bargain, and perhaps that's also symbolic that he died of pancreatic cancer as a fruitarian, with the apple on the back of the phone as well. But I don't want to say anything more than that. It's another sort of fascinating anecdote in these unconnected pieces of data. But my real question is this. Paul said that we need a new diversity, which I thought was a very, very beautiful thing to say. And I was racing through my mind to try to think, well, how do we get new diversities? Where do these new diversities come from? And then I realized what my profession was as great books, and I thought, oh yeah, of course, the past. That in some sense, a sort of careful recovery of any number of ideas from the past, or any number of works of art, or long poems, or spiritual treatises, some of which are yet untranslated, or at least long neglected, could provide some of this diversity. And it seems like we're just in this incredible age in which old things are new again, old things are urgent, old things could help form this new diversity. And so I was hoping just to ask my two new friends that question in particular. Are there any old ideas which perhaps once out of date now seem to recommend themselves with a special urgency, and could help us create this new diversity? But also, of course, remember what Chesterton talks about, the democracy of the dead, right? Giving our ancestors the right to vote and how we live our lives as well. So any sources for new diversity of ancient ideas that are ripe for a comeback?
He tosses a softball to you. That's a great question.
I have one or two if you need another second to think.
No, I'm just saying that is such a great question, but it is. Anyway, carry on.
Well, right. The obvious thing that is once regarded as old-fashioned but isn't actually right for a comeback is Christianity. It just is. It's very interesting to me. I'm somebody who became a Christian 4 or 5 years ago, entirely unexpectedly, and certainly wasn't looking for it, didn't even really want it either. But when Christ comes looking for you, it turns out you have no choice in the matter. Well, you do, but you should once you start to see what's going on. So since I became a Christian, I've been writing about it. And again, that wasn't something I really intended to do. I never thought I'd be standing up on stages like this talking about this, but it's what's happened, so I do it. And since I've done it, a lot of people have written to me, and they've said, I recognize myself in the story you've told. And there's something going on. There's certainly something going on in Britain and Ireland, where younger people who are growing up in a completely disenchanted age, actually a nihilistic age, in which there is absolutely nothing at the heart of the culture now. There's just no teaching. And when I was growing up, there was a residual Christianity in England, and it formed the morality of the culture, even though most people weren't practicing Christians, and it was there, and you learned it at school, and you sort of grew up knowing what it was. That's all really gone now. There's nothing there. And kids are growing up with phones in their faces all day and nothing at all. And they're starting to turn around. I hear from young people a lot and say, I want spiritual truth. I need to find a core. I need to know what's going on because this is horrific. And it is horrific for young people especially. And so they are looking for truth. And when they look to the church, they need to look to a church that is strong and true and will give them that truth and hold on to that truth in the face of what modernity is giving to them, and actually not bend with it and not put robot priests in the church and not try and impress everybody with flashing screens, because people want an alternative to that, actually. And you could take everything that's been developed in the modern world over the last 30 years and chuck it in the bin, and you wouldn't lose anything, and you would gain a lot. There's been nothing created that has been of any value, really, in any significant terms compared to the rest of human culture. We haven't created great music, we haven't built great cathedrals, we haven't made even great technologies, really. And yeah, we've got phones and computers, but big deal. I mean, they're nothing compared to the leaps we made before. They've actually degraded us. So there is, as I say, true faith, properly practiced, is the thing people really need, but they also need great books. I'm a writer, yeah. You know, one of the reasons I still put things in books is that everything I write on the screen is going to be completely ephemeral and might not even be accessible in 30 years' time. And when all the electricity inevitably goes out, it's going to be a digital dark age for any historians in the future trying to find out what we did now. Books still really matter, and they will last much longer than anything else. So yes, great books, great music. And here's an old-fashioned technology, conversation, right? It's a dying art, conversation. Once you've all smashed your smartphones up with hammers, as I told you to earlier, you will find that the art of conversation will flourish again in your life, because this stuff just gets in the way of everything, because it fragments everything. So all the basic things, yeah, music playing, conversation, books, and proper worship, those are the things. And people are still going to want those things in 500 years' time. And I don't think they're going to want Twitter and Instagram.
Well, I really mean it when I say that was a great question, because in many ways, without even intending for this to happen, the premise of your question has been what I've devoted my writing life to. And the audience needs to know that you are a scholar of Dante, and you have a new translation of Dante's Inferno just published. And I wrote a book called How Dante Can Save Your Life, because God used that very old book to challenge me, to open me up, to lead me to repentance and renewal. So I think that one of the best things to happen in this country in the past few decades has been the birth of the classical school movement, especially classical Christian schools, because these are the institutions that are teaching these old books. And so the recovery of old books and old stories is hugely important. But I would say something theological and metaphysical. I think that we made a very big wrong turn in the West when the nominalism, philosophical nominalism, triumphed metaphysical realism at the end of the High Middle Ages. Now, what do I mean by that? Simply this, that prior to the High Middle Ages, everybody believed, generally speaking, that matter and spirit interpenetrated each other in some mysterious way. Even non-Christians believe this. This was, as the Anglican theologian Hans Boersma points out, this was the shared belief of the entire church of the first 1,000 years. But when William of Occam's razor fame, when he defeated Thomas Aquinas and the scholastics in the great medieval debate, with his philosophy of nominalism. Nominalism says essentially that matter doesn't have any intrinsic meaning. They were all Christians. Occam was a friar, but this set into motion a series of processes that eventually led to the scientific revolution. It led to what Yuval Noah Harari, the guy you love so much, says was the West made a fateful choice. We exchanged meaning for power. And that was hugely important, because it meant that if we cast out the idea that there is meaning embedded, a logos embedded in the material world, then we could do anything we want with the material world. In time, over the next few hundred years, that we get to the point where all this environmental degradation we have is there, and we are even mutilating our bodies and the bodies of our children in order to establish control and impose will on the matter that is the body. So what Hans Boersma says is that we need to return to the view of the church of the first millennium, that matter and spirit do interpenetrate, or as Ken Myers of Mars Hill Audio Journal says, matter matters. I'm not sure how we get back to that from the Protestant world, the Orthodox Church, of which Paul and I are members, and the Catholic Church, which Jason's a member, do still teach this, however imperfectly we laity may practice it. But it's still there. I think it can be recovered, and it must be recovered, because as our friend Ian McGilchrist, the great psychiatrist, British psychiatrist, who wrote a wonderful book called The Matter with Things. It's massive, but he talks about this at a very deep level, about how over the last 500 years we have lost the ability to perceive meaning in the created world. I think it's something that we have to figure out a way to do, and some of our best theological minds, pastors, lay leaders in the church, need to go back and reacquaint ourselves with the teachings of the old church, of the pre-modern church. I'll end on this. This morning, I saw a review of Living in Wonder, my new book, by a young woman, Lindsay Schlegel, who writes for Bishop Robert Barron's Word on Fireside website. She loved the book, and she said something at the end that just delighted me. She said, "Of course, none of this Rod Dreher proposes is new. It's the method of the church fathers." I said, "Thank you, Jesus. That's what I was trying to do. Nothing I have to say is new. I'm just trying to point people in this world back to the ancient church, back to the early church, to the church fathers." And I think that's what Paul is trying to do too in his work. Unfortunately, I don't know your work that well, but I will. And it sounds like you're trying to do the same thing.
I just wanted to say something else, just to take it full circle to where Paul began with Tolkien. I think Paul had the arresting solution that if we want to be like God, then what do? We create. But because we can't create ex nihilo, we have to destroy first in order to put ourselves in an analogous situation. So it's a sort of diabolical parody. If we could call something like that a counter-creation or an anti-creation, then Tolkien, of course, has a sub-creation, which is a very beautiful thing, and it's also very connected to romantic poets, right? But the idea is to chiefly to perceive the world because it is beautiful, to absorb it, to admire it, and then to recreate it in works of art, in poetry, in architecture, in urban planning, in which we think of sort of like Christopher Alexander, if you know him, in which we reintegrate our urban communities into natural landscapes. And that's a type of sub-creation. And Tolkien says it's one of the gifts of being a human being, is that God created us in his image, but God was a maker, therefore we are makers too. And one of our privileges, I hardly have to convince fellow writers up here, right? But one of our privileges of makers is to take God's creation and give it back to him in praise and worship. And so Paul sort of inspired me here. I wrote down in my little notebook, beauty is the technology that enhances worship, right? Beauty is a technology that enhances worship. I like that formulation, not just because it hints at Tolkien's idea of sub-creation, but also I think that it gives us a positive vision for ways in which our technological goods could be deployed, in which I think, Greeks building temples in countrysides, right? Building beautiful cathedrals. These are types of technologies, aren't they, right? But they're technologies whose primary telos is to return to the Creator in gratitude, the world that he has given us, but as reshaped. And this is not as new as I think. There's a wonderful Byzantine philosopher, Leontius of Crete, right, who says that the dew, the rain, the snow, the sun, the clouds don't automatically worship God on their own, but it is man's privilege to absorb them, then to give them back to God in praise. And that sounds awful like what Paul says in Romans, that in some sense nature is yearning to utter praise, but man has the privilege and the gift of loaning his voice to creation to create the hymn. And that's our works of art, that's our works of beauty. And then it seems like it's also an exciting way for us to employ our technology to create works that enhance beauty, subcreation.
Yeah, I think you could combine what you just said with what Rod's talking about with the notion of matter infused in spirit as well, because humans are tool makers. We've never lived without tools. We can't live without tools. You can't. We'd be dead in 2 minutes if we didn't use our brain to create things. We're soft little flabby creatures. We could never outrun a tiger. We could never fight a bear. We've always had to make tools from the very beginning, so there's not going to be a humanity without making tools and technologies. The question is what they serve and how they serve them and what the purpose of making them is. So as you say, you can create a machine, or, well, maybe not a machine, but you can create a technology of any kind that has either the purpose of worship or at least is in service to creator and creation in a broad way and to humans, or you can create a machine that is entirely divorced from any notion of anything other than human power. And that's what we do in the modern world. All of our machines, from nuclear bombs to iPhones, are designed with human power in mind. We're the creators, but we're not creating in service to anything else, and we don't believe matter's infused with spirit. And in the case of the iPhone, that allows other spirits to infuse themselves through the matter that we've decided to ignore. And it's, I find it endlessly fascinating that the Silicon Valley guys know very well that spirit is infused in matter. They know that very well. They keep talking about it. But we're pretending it's not. So the question for me is always what technology serves. I think that line about beauty is really lovely. It's striking how ugly the modern world is. Really ugly. It's striking how ugly our buildings are.
As wealthy as we are.
Well, it's nothing to do with money. I mean, this is exactly the point. So medieval Europe is very poor in modern terms, and they build these astonishing cathedrals that the people who start building them will never see because they'll be dead by the time before they're finished. You know, their grandchildren might finish them, but they build them to the glory of something higher than them. They build this beautiful thing in service to God. Painting is in service to God. Music is in service to God. Everything now is in service to mammon, and that's why it's ugly. I was in New York City yesterday. I was just looking out the window at the skyscrapers there. Actually, quite striking that even the skyscrapers of the 1930s are more attractive than the ones of today. The Chrysler Building's quite interesting, isn't it? The Empire State Building. Now they don't even bother. Now it's just like, here's a huge glass thing, and it's a bank, or it's got a corporation in it, and it's about money, and we don't care. And that's it. This is what we do now. So there's no beauty because we don't care. We don't even know what that means, and we don't think matter's infused with spirit, and we're not trying to say anything other than we want more money and we want more growth. So if the technology, it doesn't matter how much technological ability you've supposedly got. I mean, we're more technologically advanced than any society ever. We can get to the moon, all that stuff. But we've still built an astonishingly ugly culture on the basis of a destroyed planet that we're constantly wrecking, and all our children are unhappy. So it doesn't really work because we're not in service to anything greater.
You know, Marshall McLuhan famously said that the medium is the message. That what is implied in that is that the real meaning of a new communications technology is found not in the messages that are transmitted through it, but in the thing itself. And that it really, I want to challenge people in the church, Christians who think that we should bring technology into the churches, put screens up and do all that, because it is a way to get the message of the gospel out, get the message out, bring that information out to people. But the story you tell, and we've all seen this, about people, families, groups of friends sitting in a restaurant with their head, not talking to each other, with their heads in their phones, that is a perfect illustration of the medium is the message, right? And what would you say to people? You did say in your talk that church people ought to get technology out of the churches. But could you talk a little more about that, about how Christians make a fundamental mistake, I believe, and I think you do too, when we see, first of all, see technology as only about pushing the message out, and secondly, where we consider the substance of the Christian faith as in message, as in communicating ideas and words, as opposed to, or as distinct from, modes of living.
Yeah, information. I mean, you said the word information. What's the Christian faith? Is it just some information? Are we just saying, oh, here's what happened, Jesus came to earth, and now you have to accept him, and there's the information? And we just go out and tell the story. or is it something else? I mean, one reason I became Orthodox is that an Orthodox service, and this is obviously true of traditional Catholic services as well, and so I'm not trying to be a triumphalist, but there's something profoundly material as well about an Orthodox church service. Everything, the body and the mind and the soul are all connected. So when I've been to other services and other traditions in my country in the past, it's felt like going to a lecture. It's a bit like this one, actually. You just sit there and you listen to some information. The priest gives you a sermon, and then maybe you stand up and you sing a hymn, and then you go home. And it isn't, for me, I just thought, okay, what was that? That was sort of, maybe it was good, maybe it wasn't, but it didn't engage me. But services I go to now will engage my whole body, because sometimes I'm crossing myself, I'm bowing, I'm kissing icons, I can smell the incense in the air, I can hear the music being sung, and all of my senses are engaged in this because matter is infused with spirit. So that's not just a matter of entertainment, it's that God is, in the words of Orthodox prayer that's very commonly used, God is everywhere present and filling all things, which I think all Christians believe, Orthodox or otherwise. God is everywhere present all the time. He's here now, and he's filling everything and everyone. So if that's true, everything is literally infused with spirit. So it's impossible not to have that relationship. And so that's where it starts. That deep relationship between matter and spirit, it's there all the time. It's always infusing everything through it. So you have to, the question of screens and information being contained through screens, yeah, okay, I mean, you could get 100,000 people watching a screen in which a priest gives a sermon, but, I mean, those of us who write online know very well that the number of people who watch you is not the same number of the people who are actually engaging you. I mean, you can see anything, it doesn't mean anything at all. So the temptation to try and reach out with lots of information and say, well, technology is what everyone's on now, so let's get the church out, let's get a Twitter account, let's get the screens in here. You end up with what the Church of England ended up doing during the COVID pandemic, which is a digital Eucharist. I mean, astonishingly, you don't have to go to church and take communion. Well, I'll sort of pretend to do it on the screen, and that counts somehow for some reason. I don't understand what that is.
I had an argument once on a trip a couple of years ago, a press trip to Asia Minor, to the churches of Asia Minor, and I was arguing with a Pentecostal guy from New York, a Christian journalist. He had brought his virtual reality headset with him on the trip, so he could go to the church in the metaverse, virtual church. And I said, oh, that would never work in my tradition, in Orthodoxy. You have to be there. And he got mad about it. He said, well, why wouldn't this work? And church is church. I'm like, no, because there's something more, much more to Orthodox worship, sacramental worship, and the Christian life than just coming together virtually or just coming together to share an emotional experience and learn some information. The guy got so visibly angry at this. I could tell he felt that there was something un-American about what I was saying. But I thought, my goodness, this is how it becomes disenchanted. This man was a conservative Christian, but his idea of the Christian life and Christian worship was about having an emotional experience and trading information, and that was it.
I had no idea there was a church in the metaverse. I've never been to the metaverse, so I wouldn't know, but it just strikes me as the kind of thing you wouldn't find in the metaverse. But that's that. So you just said one thing there that's important. So whatever Christian tradition you're in, it's always about coming together with other people, because that's what the church is, right? You get together in a room. This is what happens at Pentecost, and that's how everything starts. You're always in a room with some actual physical people having an experience with Christ, with the Holy Spirit. That's what happens. You can't substitute that for anything else. It doesn't matter what your tradition is. You cannot substitute the actual being with other people in the material, physical world, which is the creation of God, for anything else. And that's the thing about the digital world that's so sinister. It's attempting to create an entirely fake version of the created reality, because this one isn't good enough. As Zoltan Istvan says, it must all be undone and replaced with technology, because we're going to rationally design it better. That's the trap. And the further you go into this world of the little screen with a little bitten apple on the back, you're living in a virtual reality. That's why it's called virtual reality. And artificial intelligence is going to make this more and more virtual very, very quickly. We're going to be in a world very soon where we will not be able to tell whether anything we watch is real. Any video you watch is real. Anything you hear is real. Someone on the phone saying that they're your mother might not even be your mother. This stuff is already happening. So this whole fake reality is being created, and the antidote to that is actual reality created by God with us in it, with us in a room, which is what Christians have been doing for 2,000 years, which is what we were told to do. When 3 or 4 of us gather together in my name, that's what we do. So we keep doing that, without the screens, just with the people, in the places, in the forest, or in the church, or in the cathedral, or in the room at home, wherever it is. That's the antidote. That's always been the antidote. And the more fake the world gets, the more real the response has to be. And that's actually really easy. It's really easy for 3 or 4 people to gather. It's easy to go to a church. It's really simple and old-fashioned. It's the ultimate old-fashioned thing to do. You don't have to have a clever response. You just go back to the thing we've always done and don't change it, and don't let the machine come into it and shatter it all and break it into pieces.
Well, I know we need to wrap up, but just one other thought. I love Paul's thought, and I love the critique, and that's why I'm a subscriber. But to add one more hopeful thing, it seems that in an age as desolate as ours, in addition to perhaps forces trying to manifest themselves, which want to rob us of happiness, surely at the same time there must be forces that are benevolent and want to bless us in a sort of special way. I mean, so perhaps even the sort of desolation is an opportunity for a type of depth that, as a culture, we haven't hungered for a long time. And my authority on that is another one of Paul's cited authors would be Lewis, of course. And you think in That Hideous Strength, right? That strange scene of the seances in the Blue Room, right? When the traditional astrological powers are invoked. But you remember the blessings that they bring are a sense of loyalty, a sense of friendship, a sense of courage, right? A sense of mercy, a sense of infinite depth, and a sense of joviality. And it seems like that's kind of an exciting opportunity as well. Just that even in the world, even in a wasted desert, if we have, and this maybe hooks up with Rod's new book as well. If we have eyes open to wonder, we can take Paul's critique seriously and Rod's optimism about wonder seriously at the same time, and be better for it.
Thank you. We're wrapping up. I want to throw one more short question to Paul, and I think it's something that'll be relevant to all of us. Paul, for the past couple of years in our friendship, you've been encouraging me to disengage from the culture war in my writing and politics and start focusing on hope and things that give people hope in this darkening time. Can you give me a short version of why it's important, why you think it's important to do that, and why you think it's important not just for writers like me, but for all people who want to live in truth to do that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, when I say that to you, I'm also reminding myself to do it. The culture war, as I said in the talk, and all of the political divisions are designed to make us hate each other. And they're designed to make us hate our enemy when we're specifically told to love our enemy. And I don't just mean philosophically. That's what the algorithm does. It monetizes division. So these things are designed to set us against each other. That's why we doom scroll. That's why we get into little groups where we are with people we like and the enemy's over there. It doesn't matter what your politics are. So it makes you hateful and angry. If I do it, it makes me hateful and angry. That's what it's supposed to do. So you have to get away from it. You said it yourself. You can't concentrate with this stuff going on, and you become the worst part of yourself. I haven't had a social media account for a long time. I had a Twitter account about 15 years ago, and I stopped using it because it was turning me into exactly the sort of person I didn't want to be, because I'm just as bad as everybody else. It was bringing out the absolute worst in me, and I was just being an idiot and just doing the things you used to do, and this was before it got really bad. So if you don't stop doing that, you can't focus on the spiritual side of things. And I actually think, and I know that I have a reputation for doom and gloom, and it's not undeserved. But as I try to say, the hope is exactly in the fact that the world is conquered, and that the world is overcome, and that there is a great deal of love in the world, and God is still there, and we are all still there, and beauty is all still there, and nature is all still there, and the fact that we're doing our very best in modern society to mess the whole thing up. As I said at the end, it doesn't triumph this machine, because it's against nature and against God, and we don't really like it at some level. So you have to get away from the temptation. It seems to me it's a provocation of your passions, right? We're all tempted to hate and divide and anger and all the stuff that we find it really easy. We have to get away from that, and then we have to say, look at all the stuff that's still there. and here's what we do instead. And as I said, I think it's quite simple, and I think it's quite easy. It's actually quite easy it's not easy to love your enemy, that's for sure, but it is easy to gather with others and to love nature and to celebrate life and to pray together and to read great books and to throw your smartphone in the bin and then stamp on it, which is what you should do. But you don't get to do both.
This is my precious.
See? You don't get to, exactly. I will happily hit it with a hammer for you if you bring it out. I'll stamp on it right here, and you will find that will be a born-again experience for you.
Paul Kingsnorth, thank you so much for being with us tonight here. A round of applause.